Welcome back, shop rats. Today we're talking about Hemis. Yeah! I've always known a fair bit about Hemis from all the way back in the early 50s when Chrysler released their first ones all the way through the 426. I've even kept up to speed a little bit on the 528 and bigger engines that other people have made. Well, part of that was because, as I've shared with you before, I did know Tom, the father of the Hemi. But, I mean, let's face it, if you're a Mopar guy, the Hemi is it. And, well, if you're a car guy, I mean, you can't deny that the Hemi was pretty amazing. Unfortunately, I just really haven't paid much attention in the last 25 years to the latest generation of Hemis. But as you know, if you've been around the channel, I've not had a lot of choice in that matter for the last, several months. Let me be clear that I still don't know exactly the issues that are going on this truck. I have been researching and studying and reading forums and trying to discern and disseminate the truth from the fiction and the fact from the fantasy. And, well, I've been trying to just understand the bottom line on what's going on with this 5.7 liter Hemi in my 2012 Ram truck. So if you're not familiar, let me catch you up to speed. Since last fall, I've had an issue with this truck where I get a cylinder 5 misfire and also an oil pressure disabling the variable valve timing on this engine. I took it in and got a diagnosis that the problem was with the MDS lifters and that it needed a set of lifters. I'm thinking it probably does need a set of lifters. And I'm certainly not in any way, shape, or form saying that Mike's diagnosis was wrong at all, okay? But I'm the kind of guy that wants to understand what's going on with something before I fork over the money. Mike's shop has been completely overwhelmed and can't even get anything in there for weeks anymore because they're just so busy. And so I haven't wanted to bug him and text with him or go in and stop and talk to him to try to gain a better understanding. He's always been very gracious to answer my questions, but I know it's difficult and interrupts his day, and I just really am trying not to tread on that friendship. So I've taken the time to dig and dig and dig and dig, and I know more about 5.7 liter Hemis than I ever wanted to know. I know more about multiple displacement systems, MDS, than I ever wanted to know, and I know more about VVT, variable valve timing, on these Hemis than I ever wanted to know. The last 20 years, I've not wanted to work on this crap. I've always just taken it to somebody else and paid for it. However, while we're in the process of all of this building back better that's going on, I haven't had a paycheck since last August, and money is really tight, and I'm not complaining or whining. That's what I chose to sign up for when I became a business owner. It's more important that the bills are paid and the employees get paid than I get paid. I'm not in a terrible financial position most of the time, and I'm able to squeak by doing guitar lessons and selling car parts and things like that. So, again, it's what I signed up for. I could close the business and go get a job, but that's not the life that I want. So, here's where we're at. I've done all of the diagnostic stuff, moving the plugs around, switching coil packs, pretty much have eliminated the injector, and I'll tell you why, as to why I'm getting a misfire on number 5. This engine does have a very slight, what they call the Hemi tick. I don't think I've got roller lifters going bad. However, and I do understand where Mike was coming from when he said my MDS lifters need to be replaced. I made assumptions about what that meant and thought that the problem was with the MDS lifters. I've come to understand that the problem is not with those lifters, and here's why. And let me be clear that on any of my videos, especially on subjects like this is not the end-all to end-all, like here's the definitive answer. I'm just sharing with you what I've learned up to this point. I may have another video in 2 weeks that I've learned more, or that some information in this one is wrong. I've already given wrong information about this problem, and I'm good at it, so I'll probably keep doing that.
Relax, Larry. It's not intentional. I'm just sharing my life.
The cylinders involved in MDS, the cylinders that shut off and allow the lifters to collapse by applying oil pressure to a special galley in the engine that causes pins to push in the lifters, causing them to operate upon spring tension under the lifter plunger and spring tension above that causes the lifter not to clatter but to collapse so that the rocker arm doesn't move. Those lifters are on cylinders number 1, number 7, number 2, and number 4. So if you're looking at the engine from the front, the driver's side bank is number 1, is the very one in the front, and the very one in the very back, number 7. And on the passenger side, it's the middle 2 cylinders on the V8. The second piece in that is, why do I keep getting this oil pressure turning off the variable valve timing code? That also puzzled me. So I started digging and digging and digging and digging and researching. And the oil that they're using in this, that Chrysler specifies for the 2012, is a 5W20. It's super thin. They don't specify synthetic or regular, whatever that is. But they say a 5W20. So I dug and dug and dug. And what I found out is that since the inception of this new Hemi, they've changed the oil recommendations many times throughout the years. And they also, between the lines and hidden behind the scenes, will tell you that for severe use duty, switch to a 5W30 oil. Now, I didn't know any of that, and I've gone based upon the recommendation of what I had in my owner's manual and what the garage is telling me, which is we use a multi-viscosity, not a multi-viscosity, excuse me, a blend of traditional and synthetic 5W20. So that's what it's had in it. Checking the oil pressure, hot idle, I was carrying about 14 pounds of oil pressure, and at 3,000 RPM, 2,500 RPM, I was carrying about 42, I believe. That's well within spec, okay? It's above spec by quite a bit. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the Chrysler spec is like 5 at a hot idle minimum, and no more than 100 at hot engine RPM for 3,000 RPM or something like that. So I was well in the middle of that spec. So the oil pressure didn't bother me, but I still was kind of puzzled about the VVT and why that was shutting off due to an oil pressure issue. So I dug and dug and dug and dug and dug some more and discovered that when the MDS turns on, it does drop the oil pressure a little bit, and that the VVT requires a minimum of 30 pounds of oil pressure to be active, and if it doesn't, it kicks the code and turns VVT off. So I also understand that a bad MDS lifter sticking, not working properly, not doing what it's supposed to do, can cause a bit of a drop in oil pressure, which can kick a VVT code. Okay, so if it's an MDS lifter, then maybe that's the issue. Okay, fair enough. But doing more and more research, I found from guys who've been using, who know more about these things than I do by a lot, including an amazing channel by a former Mopar technician. And if I can remember to, I'll try to post the link here in the video. What a wealth of knowledge that guy is. Anyway, some guys are running 5W30 and having success with getting their oil pressure up higher with no detrimental effects to their system. Now that's interesting to me, so I dug and dug and dug and dug on that and found out that Chrysler says in heavy duty use situations use a 5W30. Now I'm telling you, pulling that boat, that big Noah's Ark of a car trailer I have, definitely qualifies for a heavy duty situation.
But wait, there's more!
As I researched, I found out that these engines are a little weird. The lifters get their oil pressure through the rocker arms and down through the push rods rather than getting their oil pressure from the valley in the lifter bores, in the lifter galley. I wasn't totally sure I believed that, so I dug and I dug and I found an oil flow diagram, and I found several other technicians who basically reiterated the same thing, and sure enough, that's what's happening, is they get their oil back through the push rod. That's what keeps the lifter pumped up. Now I know that by putting this transmission in manual 6, which takes it out of its automatic mode and puts it into a different mode, or by hitting the tow haul button, it completely shuts the MDS off on this truck. So that multiple displacement system does not work. It stays running on all 8 cylinders. In other words, eco mode, which is what the MDS is, does not come on when it's in tow haul. So the motor always is running in 8 cylinders. So I ran it like that for a while. I drove it in that non-eco trailer haul mode. I've driven it with it in manual 6 instead of in just regular drive. And it didn't seem to make any difference in the issue. And what I noticed was if I drove it slow, if I didn't rev the engine up very much, I didn't seem to get problems, although once in a while I still might kick a misfire code or a VVT code. But for the most part, I guess I was getting more VVT codes like that, but I still would get a misfire code. Well, once I learned that cylinder number 5 is not part of MDS, it made me really start digging and questioning. Let's face it, if the pins on the MDS lifter are sticking and not allowing the lifter to return to normal functionality, that's not going to give me a number 5 misfire. That's going to be a number 7 or a number 1, a number 2, or a number 4. So things weren't totally adding up. What I also started observing was I wouldn't get any problems even in eco mode, even when I had MDS activated, unless I really revved the engine up for an extended period of time. Then it would start to break down. I would actually start to hear a lifter tick, and I would immediately get a number 5 cylinder misfire code. So we know that there's a problem in number 5. I've started to determine that it's probably a problem with the number 5 lifter, which is a traditional hydraulic lifter, not an MDS lifter. So I did. Coming home down my road one day, I revved the crap out of it, got it to where it was missing really bad and ticking really bad, and got out and listened. And you can hear, without my stethoscope, but you can hear it's definitely on this bank, and it sounds like around number 5, which is the one that's the hardest to get to, right next to the brake booster. So after I discovered the lifters are fed through the push rod, I started wondering, I wonder if the issue isn't with the lifter, but I'm wondering if the issue is with the valve springs. That would make some sense, that under normal operation, let's say we had a valve spring that was broken down at the bottom so that it still functioned fairly normal until the RPMs got up higher, but it's operating at a much lower spring tension, and once those RPMs get up higher, the rocker arm or the lifter starts to float. The push rod comes off of the lifter, and that lifter's not getting hydraulic oil or engine oil anymore because it gets its oil pressure through the rocker arm into the lifter, and the lifter collapses. What's amazing to me is if you would shut the truck off, let it sit for 30 seconds, start it back up again, the lifter tick was gone and the engine operated fairly normally. And it did this really consistently, so I felt like I was really on to something. So me being the engineering type that I am, having an engineering background, for something to be factual in the science world, it has to be repeatable. So I repeated that several times, and consistently, if I rev it up to a certain point and basically rod the crap out of it, I could repeat that issue every single time, get the cylinder misfire on number 5, get valve train clatter, lifter clatter, whatever you want to call it, shut it off, let it sit, start it up again, lo and behold, everything's fine. Now it's possible, and I'm still got this at the back of my head, that there's something wrong with the MDS solenoid on number 5, which also feeds from the galley that feeds on number 7, but it also affects number 5 in its oil pressure, okay, because it's in the same area of that oil galley. And it's possible that's sticking somehow and causing an oil pressure drop on number 5, causing the lifter to collapse. But there's more. There's more! The more I researched and the more I thought the cheapest thing to try first is to change the oil, put some more cleaner in it. I wasn't sure what Mike was using. I didn't bother asking him, but I was pretty sure I knew. I did the research. And that's the direction I decided to go. I decided to bump it up to the 5W30 add a half a bottle of the Seafoil high mileage engine oil additive, which is a cleaner to help clean the varnish out, and see where we're at. Now, I knew that the oil in the engine was fairly varnishy, not terrible, but much more so than I thought it should be. But considering the trip we had, okay, the oil was getting close to an oil change anyway, so possibly. But when I drained it out, I thought, wow, this oil really does smell rather varnishy. So I'm guessing that the cleaner that Mike put in probably is working, and then with having worked it hard on the trip besides, it's cleaning some varnish out. So I bumped it up to the 5W30. I put in a half a bottle of the Seafoam high mileage, started it up, and immediately can hear a difference in the way the motor runs. It's got less of its Hemi tick at idle. It seems like it's got more throttle response. It's a bit snappier. And I drove it a lot yesterday. And if I really, really push it hard, I can still get it to miss on number 5. But I would say that we have solved 80% of our problem. Now, I'm not saying we've solved anything, okay? We've changed it and improved it by about 80%. I've driven it today. I drove it all day yesterday on all this. I really forced it. I didn't get any code at all. I still could replicate that problem, but I had to rev it a lot higher and longer before I would get a number 5 misfire. And here's the interesting thing. My oil pressure changed. Actually quite significantly as far as I'm concerned. I bumped from 14 psi hot oil pressure to right around between 28 and 30 at idle, hot. My 3,000 RPM oil pressure went from whatever I said it was 40, 45, and bumped up to just under 60. So bumping that 10 in oil weight definitely made a difference. I'm going to be back. I've got to sign some paychecks and take care of some business stuff, so don't go away. You won't even know I'm gone. I don't even know why I'm telling you, but you're spending time with me. You're in the passenger seat, so I'll be right back. So here's the bottom line. By the way, did you miss me? I'm back. I'm just slowly starting with the simplest things first, and definitely feel like changing the oil and the viscosity and the cleaner is making a difference. Now, this morning when I was recording on the way to town, I could definitely feel it was doing some missing, but I never got a code. So it tells me there's probably still something else going on in there. But the real point of this talk about it is to share just what I've learned in the last month or so since I last talked about this, and the progress that I've made so far. My gas mileage yesterday, it's so weird because day to day it seems to change, and that's what really makes me wonder if it's more of an electronics issue in some ways. However, I know that there's a mechanical issue of some kind, but is that, it's just, I was at a point, and I'm probably still at a point, where the only way I'm going to ultimately know what's going on, I think, is to just start tearing this thing apart and see what's going on inside and commit myself to whatever it's going to take to get it fixed. I looked at a company called, ASI Specialty, AST, I don't remember. Anyway, they offer kits. They don't make anything per se. They're a reseller, but they put together the kits to replace the cam. Sorry, I got a phone call in the midst of that. Start tearing it apart and just, tear the valve cover off the driver's side. See what that looks like. See if I do have a cracked spring on number 5. Problem solved. That doesn't work. Pull the rockers off. Check the push rods. Make sure there's not a plugged push rod in there that's restricted somehow, causing oil flow restriction. If that doesn't work, then I would say pull the intake off. I don't know that there's anything I can check easily. I could swap, I suppose, an MDS solenoid from number 1, swap the number 1 and number 7 MDS solenoids, but then I'd have to put it back together and try that. Maybe that's worth doing. My temptation at that point is to pull the driver's side head and actually look at the lifters and see if maybe there is a roller that's shot and it's chewing the cam up slowly, and this is just the early stages of that. But changing the oil viscosity and increasing the oil pressure definitely seems to have had an effect on how often the problem comes into play. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm actually on my way to Mike's right now. I doubt I'll get to talk to him. But if he happens to be in the office, maybe I'll pick his brain for a minute. But I got to pay them the bill from when they looked at it, so I got to go get that done. All right, if I have updates, I'll be right back after I talk to him. And if not, we'll catch you on the next one. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for sharing my journey, because I'm just sharing it as I learn it.
Yeah.